The jury has the case in the final Lori Daybell trial. The convicted killer presented no evidence in her defense and did not testify. Now the jury of 12 decides if she did conspire with her brother to kill Brandon Boudreaux, her former nephew-in-law. Closing arguments by the so-called Doomsday Mom became emotional and riddled with objections by the state. I'm Justin Lum, and we are on the record. A jury of 12 has the Lori Daybell case in their hands. They will decide the fate of her final trial, this murder conspiracy trial, the last one here in Arizona, her third overall, the fourth we've covered in this Vallow Daybell saga involving Lori Daybell and her husband, Chad Daybell, who's on death row in Idaho. This was a quick one, 5 days, as 18 witnesses testified, and now we wait. I'm Vox 10 investigator Justin Lum, joined by Special Projects executive producer George Obi. We heard from Nick Balance. He was the last one. He has a lot of experience in multiple trials regarding both Chad and Lori. Technical testimony, but it was reminded to the jury in closing arguments. Cell phone device locations.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk a lot about the process in which the state set up their witnesses, you know, whether it was better to end on one than the other. But you're right. Very important what was presented this morning, at least to show the jury that, look, we know the Jeep. We've already told you the Jeep was there, who it belongs to, where it was in the hours and the minutes leading up to this shooting. But we also, as the state pointed out, we also want to show you that there were several cell phones involved, including the burner phone, and we were able to track that phone. We were able to track Lori's phone, Alex's original phone, and then explaining how you're able to do that and how you're able to know who owns which phone and approximately where it's at. And then they used that data to set up the timeline between essentially October 1st and October 3rd, right? I mean, we saw elements of it. Yesterday we saw the video at the storage location and approximately where the apartments in Rexburg were to this storage unit. Explained who we saw on that video, why that was so important, and then today some more of the nuance of the time frame for those 3 days and where all the key players were in this shooting.
By phone, by device, and Lori tries to poke holes into that and how, you know, cell phone towers pick it up, and you're placing a phone at a location doesn't mean that you're placing a person. But Treena Kay, it's her job as a prosecutor to redirect and focus that for the jury that, okay, we've told you where the Jeep has been along this trip from Idaho to Arizona. The Jeep that's described by multiple witnesses who didn't know Brandon Boudreaux at the time, would not really care to benefit from helping him at all. He was just a new neighbor. And then now we get into calls that were documented between Lori, Alex Cox, Chad Daybell, Melanie Pulowski. We don't know what those calls were about. We don't know what was said, but there is this timeline of the phones since they were purchased in late September at this Idaho Walmart through this October 2nd day of the shooting. But all with that said, Lori doesn't put up a defense, okay? She didn't cross-examine Ray Hermosillo. We talked about that last night. And then today, she has questions from Nick Balance. That's it. The state rests its case. And, you know, for Saul, we weren't really surprised she didn't have anyone to testify on her behalf. She wasn't going to testify on her behalf, but she wanted to get to Rule 20 right away.
You know, we were surprised. I know I was surprised. This was the one case where the evidence was probably the least effective in trying to pin her to all of this. I mean, there's evidence there, but I think in the eyes of the jury, again, these folks don't have any idea, in theory, about her previous crimes. And so this was an opportunity, if she were to either take the stand or at least provide some witnesses, this would be a great opportunity for her to do so. But then, as you mentioned, we saw in her closing arguments, she fell right back into the trap that she did in the last trial, and using those closing arguments, or at least attempting to use it, as her way of testifying. And there were a lot of objections, understandably so, from the prosecution, saying, look, this isn't an opportunity for you to stand up here at the microphone and testify. And I would imagine, as the previous jury did in her first Arizona trial, I'm sure this jury picked up on that as well. Like, you're not testifying, you're not taking the stand, but you're also pseudo testifying in your closing argument. So there was a lot of that, plenty of missed opportunities. We've discussed in the last week how many opportunities she could have taken advantage of to not only object to certain testimony, but really go after some of these witnesses and use some of that data against the prosecution. Like you mentioned, just because a phone is in this location doesn't mean me, the human who owns it, is in that location. She even kind of alluded to in some of her questioning in her cross-examination of, well, it doesn't everybody have multiple phones? How do you know that it's not somebody's tablet and not their phone? Any good defense attorney would have just hammered that home and at least cast some doubt in the jury's mind, because that's really all you need to do, is you need to cast doubt in one of the jurors' minds in order to kind of blow this case up, and we just didn't see it.
So were you more shocked that she didn't testify on her behalf, or because I don't think we're shocked that she didn't have witnesses to call. She didn't have witnesses last time. So that's why I was saying you weren't surprised that she was just like, all right, I'm done. I'm going to go to closing arguments.
I was probably more surprised she didn't testify, because we noticed a difference in her cross-examination. She spent more time on some of the witnesses and had more precise questions for them. But we just felt like in any of these two trials, that we almost felt like she wanted to testify.
Yeah.
Like she wanted to tell her side of the story, because we saw her try and do that in both closing arguments, right? So what better way, if you really want to do that, do it the right way, take the stand. But we also know
the right way.
Right. But we also know that opens her up to cross, and we know how she handles a lot of that. As our panel has said, she didn't cross Hermosillo yesterday potentially because of what he knows about her, and she might have been intimidated by that. So it is quite possible that she would have felt intimidated and out of her element being grilled by Treena Kay. But yeah, I'm somewhat surprised, because we have covered Lori a long time. We've talked a lot about her. We know quite a bit about her and her demeanor and how she carries herself. And she struck me as the kind of person that would want to get on the stand and finally tell, quote unquote, her side of the story, and she didn't do it.
Yeah, and I think if this were to be the case, if there was a chance, the opportunity to see her testify and take the stand, you would think it'd be this one, because our panel has said this is the toughest case and like the weakest out of the whole saga. Idaho, it's just like overwhelming. It is horrific.
Yes, right.
You have multiple accomplices. You have, recordings and text messages about the spiritual beliefs. That one is just a whopper. I mean, what's dozens of witnesses, I think, in the 60s.
Yeah.
We covered both Lori's and Chad's. Mm-hmm. So, but the closing arguments, she does have that pattern. She's also not a trained attorney. So does she know what she's doing? We're going to hear her closing arguments, a little bit of that in just a moment. But Treena Kay lays out the timeline, the PowerPoint presentation, and I thought, she basically summed it up for the jury before they take the case. Let's take a listen.
Talking about September 23rd, 24th, 25th, all the way through up to October 2nd. So this premeditation is above and beyond what is required by the law. This defendant started helping when they went to buy that burner phone, when she loaned her Jeep to allow it to be tinted, when she Googled how to remove that rear seat, and they took off the tire, and she kept it with her. Then she rented a storage unit and put it in there. When she kept her brother's cell phone and kept it with her as she went around Idaho, and when she made that call between those two phones right around the time of when the shooting was supposed to occur. That is the aiding and the promoting done by this defendant. That is her acts. That is the conspiracy.
Now, does a juror out of this group of 12, ask, well, did she know she was helping out? Is Alex the mastermind? There's so much, and it's hard for us because we know so much. We have to try to put, ourselves in that jury. Mm-hmm. We only know this, what we've gotten over 5 days. We don't know anything else. Like, just pretend. Did she know she was helping Alex Cox? And do you even have to prove that she knew? She did what she did according to the evidence.
Well, again, according to the evidence, and this morning I was taking notes as the FBI Special Agent Balance was kind of going through the different phone numbers and where the phones were and at what time. It got a little confusing, but again, if I'm a juror and I'm trying to keep track as they would have or should have this morning, and thinking, is once you're kind of following along and creating kind of this timeline on your own notes, and you start to piece together, okay, she's communicating with her brother, and then her brother and Chad are communicating, and then Melanie calls, right? We wondered, like, Melanie's calling the same morning, right? Just hours before.
They're all communicating on this morning.
And is that by coincidence? Is it a coincidence that they're all talking to each other on the same day that he gets shot at? It's a very strange coincidence. And then trying to figure out, okay, why does Alex leave one of his phones in Idaho, but then still has this burner phone, which they proved that was that same burner phone that was purchased in Utah at the Walmart, and then somehow gets to Arizona and then back, almost back to Idaho before it just disappears off the face of the earth.
And I think burner phone just comes off suspicious, right?
It's odd.
We love shows like The Wire. But and I think
I don't have a burner phone. I have one phone. I'm good with my one phone.
But like, I have my personal phone, my work phone.
Right.
I don't consider any of them burner phones, but we talk about burner accounts on social media. I think that word comes off, right? The track phone was used a lot with
Right.
testimony, but it's what is
They
the equivalent.
Yeah, they identified it as a burner phone in the trial
Yeah.
because it's designed to just be a temporary phone.
So jury hears that term.
Right.
Maybe that's the thing that says, okay, why did she get this phone?
Right.
They were there together buying this phone. The shooting happens. These are the only people who know the address of Brandon Boudreaux, and then trace back to testimony on June 25th, 2019. And Brandon, by oath, in his testimony says he feels she ruined the marriage. She called him gay. She accused him of hacking the computer, trying to take away the temple recommend. Like, the human side and that storytelling to a jury can really believe that, whether it's true or not, is that, okay, this may be a woman that was trying to ruin this marriage. They just don't know exactly why. There has been some testimony on financial information and documents and this divorce, and people can be thinking, they can be speculating, is this a money motivation between this group?
Right. And we alluded to on that first day when Brandon took the stand afterwards, we felt like Lori didn't do enough to discredit Brandon, whether it was him as an individual, him and his recollection about what happened that morning. That was an opportunity to kind of diffuse what Brandon was saying and give the jury, look, don't believe what this guy's saying. Even though he thinks that my brother and I are the ones that want to kill him, like, she didn't do enough to really paint him as someone who wouldn't tell the truth. And that probably, I'm sure the jury picked up on that, or at least looked at Brandon's testimony and took it at face value, because any good defense attorney would have, knowing that's the first witness in this whole case, this whole trial, a good defense attorney would have hammered Brandon and really tried to go at it, would have tried to go at his credibility.
Yep.
She didn't do that.
And offer up more objections. That comes with experience during the direct examination.
Yeah.
He comes off as a cleanest witness, star witness. I mean, you look at him in the suit and tie, he's being truthful, he's being honest. I mean, it doesn't matter if the answer is short or elaborate. I mean, he's telling his truth. He gets a little bit emotional at times. He brings in that family dynamic and talks about how his family life was ruined and he didn't know what to do. He's just been shot at on October 2nd, 2019. And at first, he may have thought it was a BB gun, but no way. And that fear that you hear in his voice and reliving that, I think that is what plays strongly to the jury. But in closings, Lori sort of pulls the victim card.
Right.
Because we only see her get emotional during these statements, whether it was openings in the first trial or sentencing in Idaho, when she's talking about herself in her family. All of a sudden, it's like, is she crying? Is she not crying? But let's listen to part of her closings.
I cannot tell you what happened that day on October 2nd, 2019, because I was not there.
And I'm going to again object to testifying, and please strike everything the defendant has said.
All right. The defendant is admonished, you cannot argue things that were not admitted into evidence.
The prosecutor wasn't there. Law enforcement wasn't there. Only Brandon knows what happened before he called 911. Only Brandon said he will not stop. The fact that I supported Melanie in her time of need does not make me against Brandon. I had nothing to gain by Brandon being hurt. Brandon has worked with law enforcement for almost 6 years to make sure that I pay a consequence.
Heard several objections during these closing arguments because Treena Kay is saying she's testifying, she's bringing in character evidence. I mean, it's sort of opening the door when you talk about the character evidence and you portray yourself as a good person, and that could trigger the fact that, you know, prosecution can bring up something like your prior convictions. But what they do is she comes back in rebuttal and says there are multiple investigations that Brandon was discussing with law enforcement, and they also involve his ex-wife, Melanie Boudreaux. So know that. And the jury is going to be like, what are they alluding to? I wish we knew more, but we can't.
Yeah, I mean, that would have been an opportunity in either, certainly the cross-examination of Brandon to really question him about his cooperation, or if you really wanted to, you know, go after this idea that, you know, I wasn't trying to break up your marriage. She alluded to it somewhat in her cross, but, you know, I think we saw this in her opening statements too, right? Right out of the gate, talking about I'm not a victim. That was objected to. And then again in the closing arguments. You know, I understand that it's difficult because you can't touch on certain things, and so, you know, the challenge for Lori was how do I go after Brandon and put onus on him if I'm not going to, if you're Lori and you're not going to throw anybody else in this thing under the bus, right? I mean, Alex is dead. You know, you could have thrown the bus at Melanie. There were times when we were wondering, wow, is she going to go there? Even Treena was like, is this going to be, you know, the second defendant case? Like, am I going to have to rethink my strategy here? They had a sidebar or the jury wasn't present when they were discussing this, but she could have very easily thrown Melanie under the bus. But that didn't happen. And then for her to turn around in this closing argument and, you know, suggest that Brandon, like an ulterior motive, that this was more of a, you know, that he's trying to make her the scapegoat in some other nefarious scheme. I mean, we did wonder, though, the weakest part, I think, of this case and the conspiracy was, what did Lori have to gain?
Yeah, what is the motive? Like, clear, like, write it out.
Right.
What is the motive? And that's what we wanted to know, and it was like Treena didn't seem to want the financial information coming in, and Lori was ready to go there and try to make it seem like police sparked that narrative by asking Brandon to provide financial documents to show that Melanie would be the one to benefit, which she would be as a beneficiary. And Treena Kay has told Judge Boreski that there is an open investigation going on with her. Like, there's just, they can only say so much when it comes to her. Will there ever be charges filed? I don't know, but clearly that was confirmed through this trial, through court proceedings, that she is still a suspect in the case, according to Gilbert police and the prosecution. Like, if they can get enough evidence, they are basically not denying that. They said that out in front of the whole world.
Yeah. And we don't know if, we've explained before, the way it works is PD investigators within the police department will build a case, they'll present it to the county attorney, then it's up to the county attorney to decide if they move forward or they send it back. We don't know if anything has been sent to the county attorney regarding Melanie's involvement in this. And we now are left with this idea that if they haven't, they're still waiting to do so. And we're 5.5 years on from this.
And the attitude by Treena and the way she said that seems like they would be optimistic, not like, I don't think it's a strong enough case. She's clearly calling Melanie out throughout closing arguments, through evidence, testimony. And we've also heard this narrative before from Lori, whether it was her sentencing or in opening statements, where she'll tell the jury, only so and so knows what happens. It's sort of, she's blaming the victim in this case here, saying that turning the tables and flipping it on him, or in her sentencing, or in her phone call with her sister or Colby from jail, saying, I know what happened, the police don't know what happened, like really passionate about, like when it benefits her, suits her, it's depending on who knows what happens, depending on the argument. And so I recognize that right away when we hear that. It's new to the jury.
It's new to them. Like I said, we know Lori well enough after covering this for so long that, continues to be the MO from her, that she knows more than you, and don't worry because, I know
it's a conspiracy by the state.
Right.
It's a conspiracy by law enforcement. That's what she's saying. I guess that's the only defense, and you don't want to put yourself on the stand.
Yeah, well, yeah, no. And again, it goes back to this whole thing is she could have very easily looked and said, well, only Alex knows the truth, or you'll have to ask Alex. We know that's, not going to happen. But it's like, I wonder at what point will she come to terms with this idea, even if it's not this case, whether she will come to terms with people out there want to know the truth, and more so her family members. Brandon would love to know. I'm sure Colby and everybody wants to know the real truth. Will she ever give them that opportunity to? And then, like you said, we'll wait to see what happens with Melanie. We don't know what evidence they have. I don't know that there was enough evidence in this trial to kind of push that over the top and get charges. There was some, but I feel like there's some that was left out, whether it's communications, emails, text. We know there are others out there, but we don't know. I just can't see there being enough in this trial that was presented.
Yeah, we're only seeing a little bit.
Right.
And it'd be interesting to know if she did take the stand, what would she have her advisory council ask her about the communications with Alex Cox and Melanie? I mean, you're not supposed to lie under oath, but what would she say if the question was, so what did you talk about during those phone calls? Why, was there a reason that you wanted new phones at Walmart? Was it a very innocent reason? I don't know. That is going to a whole nother rabbit hole, and I don't know if she would lie, but that's,
and you can't take the stand and tell the prosecutor in cross-examination, well, I know the truth. Okay, well, then what is it? Don't worry, I know the truth. The jury's going to be like, well, wait a minute. That's almost more damaging to your case than
not. And that's probably
the
biggest trigger to opening the door.
Yes. Is
putting yourself up there.
Yeah.
Had Lori considered it? I mean, you got to think she's been thinking about it. Do I do it? Do I not do it? Before we go, let's talk about this jury that knew it was time to go home at about 3 o'clock, had the case for about 15 minutes. Who knows if they decided on a 4-person or raise their hands on what everybody was thinking. Yeah. Finally, they can talk about this after a week. It hasn't been too long, but 5 days they have to keep their mouths shut about the evidence and what they're hearing. And now they can breathe a sigh of relief or just say, whoa. Yeah. What is going on? What do you guys think? And somebody or multiple people said, well, should we just go home for the day and rest?
I think it's a great litmus test. If we look at the last jury, we've spoken to a few of them, what they experienced, how relieved they were to finally be able to talk about this case amongst themselves when they began deliberations. This jury has been given a lot in the last, 5 days of testimony. 18 witnesses, that's a lot.
18 witnesses, and just like a faucet running.
Yeah.
5 days straight.
So you can understand, especially after today being like, look, let's everybody go home, gather ourselves, return at 10 a.m., fresh-faced, ready to go. And then we'll see how long it takes. If it's just one person, we'll know right away if the 4-person comes back and tells the judge they need more time, or if there are any questions from the jury that the jury has. Curious to what those questions would be, but this jury, to cram that much information in basically less than a week, right? Tomorrow would be 1 week since we started this trial.
Yeah.
So
I think they get to focus on the cell phone locations, the license plate reader images, any images of the Jeep and what that Tesla looked like in the storage unit video. That's what they'll go over if, this group of 12 has any questions. But they begin those deliberations tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., and that's really the beginning of it. And we'll see how long it takes. We'll be covering it. We'll be watching it. But for now, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. See you tomorrow on The Record.